All right. So today, guys, we are talking about the purchase and sale agreement. And the purchase and sales agreement is the heart of any contract. It's how we make our offers. It's the way that offers are going to come to us on our listing. And there's a lot of contracts available. These are our contracts. These are the Georgia Association of Realtor contracts. Now, there are a series of contracts called RE forms that are created by the MLSs. We don't use those. Okay. And our recommendation is, our broker's recommendation is, if we ever receive an offer on RE forms, we're going to rewrite it and put it on the GAR forms, the Georgia Association of Realtor forms. And the reason this is so important, particularly when we get to the contract stage, is this is the agreement that your buyer is getting into with the seller, or your seller is getting into with the buyer. And we want to make sure that contract is really strong. And the GAR forms have been around over 30 years. They've been adapted and edited every single year. They have been tried in court over and over and over again. Whereas the RE forms, those have only been around for about 10 years. And they haven't had the same challenges and same experience in court. So we don't know how some of that language is going to play out in decisions. Because what the MLSs weren't able to do is they couldn't just go copy the GAR forms. They had to write their own contracts. So strongly recommend you get very familiar with these. And if you ever receive an offer on RE forms, the broker's recommendation is we rewrite that offer. Even if we love that offer and want to accept that offer, your client can sign that contract, that RE form. We just don't have as much confidence in it. We would rather see you rewrite the offer on the GAR forms using the same purchase price, the same contributions to closing, same closing date, and send it back on our forms for them to sign. Does that make sense, Cheyenne?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The other thing that I wanted to say is, when you're working new construction, typically the builders are going to provide the contracts, and that's the only way to buy those properties. Okay. We're not going to be able to replace a builder's contract with a GAR contract. And quite honestly, we don't want to, because our GAR contract, the center part of it is 9 pages long, and we'll have a few exhibits to it. But normally our contracts are 15 to 20 pages long, whereas a builder's contract might be 60 pages long. The big difference between a builder's contract and our purchase and sale agreement that we use all the time is, when we make an offer for our buyer on a property, we know exactly what they're getting, right? If I were to go try and buy your house, Susan, I know what I'm getting, right? Because I can step into your house, walk through your house, see your house. I can have an inspector go to the house. But if I'm going to go buy a property at a builder, from a builder, that house may not be built yet. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know how much insulation is going to be in there. I don't know what sort of countertops there are. So there's lots of things that need to be included in that contract, that when we're buying something that hasn't been materialized yet, they get covered in that contract. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But understand, we still have an obligation to our client to understand that builder contract. And we're going to need to read through that and make sure we understand every clause and special stipulation and every gotcha that's in there, so that our clients don't have any surprises. Okay. These are the forms we're going to get to know intimately. We should never have surprises when we're dealing with GAR contracts. So with that said, let's start unpacking the purchase and sales agreement. like I said, this is the heart of the contract. So we start with this form, and we may have other things that get added to be a part of it, but every contract is going to have the purchase and sales agreement. It won't necessarily have any of the attachments. The purchase sales group divided into 3 different sections, 3 main sections. One's going to be section A. This is where we're going to put all of our key terms. This is where we filled in the information. Most all of our blanks have been moved to the first page in section A. We then go to section B, which is an explanation of what was on section A. So to help you understand what I mean by that, let's say that we're looking at the closing date. Well, it says the closing date shall be February 15th with a possession date transferred to the buyer upon closing. That's all the language that we have. Well, if we want to know more about that, instead of looking at A4, we can go down here to B4, and you'll see we've got a couple of paragraphs that explain what is the closing date, how's that significant, what if the closing date's on a weekend, all of that sort of information. Okay, so everything in B correlates with a paragraph on the first page. And then paragraph C, these are definitions, terms and conditions. These are extras for the contract. And it's going to include our exhibits. These are the other additions to the contract. These are other forms that are becoming part of our total contract, along with our special stipulations. And we're going to talk about those in detail when we get to that page. But that's our main structure, is A, B, and C are the 3 different parts of the contract. Now we're going to start moving through it as if we were filling this in and we were going to make an offer on a property. So we're working with a buyer, we're making an offer, and we're making that offer today. We're going to put our offer date at the top. We're going to put our address in here, 123 Main Street. And that's Snellville, Gwinnett County. Well, that didn't finish. 30078. And we're going to X out the MLS number and the parcel ID number. This is something that our broker wants to see us do. Now, if we receive an offer and they've put an MLS number and a tax parcel ID number, that's okay. Just verify that that information is correct. And the reason that that's important is the whole purpose of paragraph A is for you and I to have conversational awareness of what property we're talking about. When it comes to a contract, a real estate contract, the property that's actually being bought or sold is whatever is in the legal description. Okay. And we're either going to have a deed attached, we're going to refer to the deed book and page, and we have a couple of other options. But that's not the way you and I talk to each other. So if you were to ask me where I live, Cheyenne, and I were to tell you that I live at Gwinnett County, deed book 37, page 124, do you have any idea where I live?
No.
None. Okay. We don't talk about that. We don't think about that. But if I told you I live at 123 Main Street in Snellville, boom, you can relate to that. And we know we're talking about the same thing. That's the reason the address is here. The MLS number and the tax parcel ID number don't matter because we know what we're talking about, the address, and we have the legal description. And when we consider all those different ways to identify a property, these are the 2 that we can screw up more often than not. You know, a tax parcel ID number is just a long string of numbers and letters. The MLS number is a string of 7 or 8 numbers. those we could transpose or just mistype a number. And then which property are we really talking about? So just don't even include them. Okay. The legal description is what we do want to pay really close attention to. And these are 4 different options for legal description. Attached as an exhibit is the best option, but we're not going to use it that often. And what we mean by attached as an exhibit, it's a copy of the deed. Okay. It's actually a printed copy of the deed that the seller gets when they buy a property and gets recorded at the courthouse. But most sellers don't have their deed handy that they can grab it, make a copy, and give it to you. There are some other ways we can get a copy of the deed. We can go to the courthouse and get a copy of the deed there from the deed room. Don't recommend that. That's a lot of time, a lot of driving, added expense you don't need. Your local closing attorney or Susan or I can pull a deed and use a deed for you because we have access to the Superior Court records and we can go try and find the property and download it. Again, not the easiest because you're having to go through somebody else to get it, but that is the strongest and best legal description. The next best option is number 3. And that's the option you should be using 95% of the time. Okay. And that's just the same as described in the deed book and page of the land records of the above county. And how you find that deed book and page is when you're in the MLS. Okay. So this is Paragon. And let's say that we were looking at a listing, and I'm just going to pull up, let's see, there's 120 that were expired. So let's say I'm making an offer on one of these properties and I'm just picking one at random. When I'm in here looking at the listing, I can go to this little emblem right here and it will take me to the tax page for that particular property. Okay. And if I scroll down and I look at the sales history over here to the far right, there is the deed book and page right here. Okay. That's as difficult it is to find it. So 28149 is our deed book. 219 is our deed page. So coming back to our contract, 28149 and 189 would be what I type in. And now that is my full legal description. And what that's telling the attorney that's going to close it, it's telling both the buyer and the seller, is that if I went to the Gwinnett County Courthouse and went to the deed room and I were to go pull this book and look on this page, a copy of the deed is what I would find for that property. So instead of attaching the deed, I'm telling you exactly where to find the deed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the 2 other options I'm not a fan of, and we really don't want you to use them. And I'll start with number 4 so you understand why. This is what we call the long description for a property, where we have the land lot of the blank district, blank section, lot blank, block blank, unit blank, phase blank of the such and such subdivision according to the plat recorded in the plat book blank, page blank. That's a lot of information and a lot of details. And it's very difficult to find all of it. And we don't have to have all of it for it to be a legal description, but there are 4 things we have to have for it to be a legal description. We have to have the lot number. We have to have the subdivision. We have to have the plat book and the plat page. So the difference between a deed book and a plat book, a deed book is a collection of deeds. And when I go look on a particular page in the deed book, there's one deed there. So
Mhm.
you tell me what the deed book and deed page is, I can go find that one property and know exactly which one it is. Well, with a plat book is a map. A plat is a map. So I go look at that map, I go get the map book, I go look on that map page. There may be multiple properties on that one page. Well, I need to know which lot number it is on that page. Okay, so I have to have lot number, and there might be more than one subdivision on that page. And I'll give you one guess. When builders build a neighborhood, what lot number do you think they all start with?
101.
Lot number one, right? I'm building this neighborhood. This is the first lot, the second lot, the third lot. So there could be two lot number ones. So I have to know the lot and which subdivision and the plat book and the page in order for it to be a legal description. And when I go look at the tax records, oftentimes we're not going to find all that information. And the place we find it, I've gone back to the same place we got deed book and page. But if you come down to the very bottom, it has the legal description. And you'll see here in the legal description, they didn't tell us the lot. They didn't tell us the subdivision. They didn't tell us the plat book or plat page. So none of the four things we have to have are we easily able to find for this property. Okay. So I don't want to use option number 4 because I'm going to struggle to find all my information. Okay. And the reason I don't use option number 2, even if I'm selling a condominium, I don't like the condominium description, because what you'll find is I have to do this long description twice. Because what a condominium is a type of a type of ownership. So when you own a condominium, you own the four corners of your property, right? Your building or your lot, you own it, but you also own a share of the common property. Everybody owns a little bit of the tennis courts. Everybody owns a little bit of the front entrance. Everybody owns a little bit of the clubhouse. Well, that little bit of ownership gets recorded in one place, and the ownership for your building gets recorded in another place. So if you're ever trying to buy a condominium, what I want you to do is the same thing. Use the attached exhibit or use the deed book and page. Don't ever use the condominium. Don't ever use the long exhibit. So these are your two best options, and this one's the one you're going to use all the time. Okay. You guys with me so far?
Yeah.
All right, good. So we'll move to section 2, and this is the purchase price of the property. This is what we're offering. This is what we've agreed to we're going to pay. This isn't the list price. This is what we're going under contract for. So, and it needs to be in US dollars. So there is no pesos or yen or gold or cryptocurrency, Australian dollars, Canadian dollars. This is American dollars is the only number that goes in there. So let's say that we were, yes, Shannon.
Yeah, I'm got a question. And right now they have like an international is what they call as coin.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't deal in, we can't put cryptocurrency in there. Now, they're making an offer of $425,000. If the closing attorney is willing to accept Bitcoin for that 425,000, that's perfectly fine. But we're not writing a contract that the buyer is going to pay the seller in cryptocurrency.
Okay.
Leave that up to the closing attorney to figure that out. But we are probably still another 5 years plus away before we see any cryptocurrency become mainstream. So for now, take that off the table. have them go cash their cryptocurrency in and pay cash for the property instead of crypto for the property.
Okay.
So we're going to make an offer of $425,000. Paragraph 3 is the seller's contributions to closing. And understand here, we're not saying this is what the closing costs are. What we're saying in this paragraph is this is how much of the buyer's closing cost that the seller is going to contribute to. So when you have a closing, there's certain closing costs that are the responsibility of the seller, and you've got certain closing costs that are responsibility of the buyer. Okay. The buyer's closing costs, if they're financing the loan, are significantly higher than the seller's. Okay. Because the biggest pieces of the closing costs, the highest expenses, are the fees charged by the lender. The origination fee and loan prep fee, and they've got different names for different stuff. But a lot of that closing cost belongs to the buyer. It's their responsibility. So very often sellers are willing to pay part of that buyer's closing cost to help make it easier for them to buy the house. Okay. That's the number that's going in here, is how much of the buyer's closing costs are we being asked to solve. This is not a percentage. Okay. You can't put in here that the seller's going to pay 100% of that. Doesn't work. We need a dollar figure in here that the seller's going to pay $3,000 toward the buyer's closing cost, $10,000 toward the buyer's closing cost. But here's the thing that you need to understand is both parties are going to have to agree to this, right?
Yeah.
The more we ask the seller to pay, the higher they probably are going to expect their house to be sold. If we want to sell it for the best price, you want the buyer to pay the most for the property, then the buyer needs to, let me rephrase that. If the buyer wants to get the lowest price for the property, they probably don't need to be asking the seller to also give them help. Okay. Whereas if they're paying top dollar for the property, it's probably very reasonable to ask the seller to pay some of the closing costs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that when we come to negotiations. I just wanted you to understand what this is. And one of the key things to understand here is, let's say that Jackie is my client and she's buying a house, and we went in here and we asked for $30,000 of help with Jackie's closing costs. Okay. Well, Jackie's closing costs were only $9,000. What happens to the extra 21? The seller keeps it. Okay. So Jackie was my buyer. We asked for all of this, but because it was more than what her actual closing costs are, the seller only had to pay for the actual closing cost. I would have done better to ask for $10,000 in help and have reduced the price of the house by $20,000. Okay. So understand there's limits to what you want to do over here. And there are certain loans that put a cap on what that can be. So you need to also talk to your lender and make sure you know that with this loan, the most that a seller can pay is 2% of the purchase price, 3% of the purchase price, 5% of the purchase price. Different loans are going to have different caps on those as well. Okay. When they're going to put when the closing date is going to be, and what cannot go in here is TBD, to be determined. We have to have a fixed date. Nothing on the contract can be decided later. We can always amend the contract and change something at a future date, but you and I can't agree to something today that we're not going to agree to until later. Right? We're signing the contract today. We need to know what we're agreeing to. And if you feel differently about that, then I would love to sign a contract to buy your car today, and I'll tell you how much I'm going to pay you for it tomorrow. Would that work for you?
No.
No. So we need a date in here. Now, when should that date be? Well, typically speaking, most lenders are going to take about 30 days to get the loan processed and done. There are some lenders out there that can move faster than that. Supreme Lending that we work with, they usually only need about 21 days, but they can do, for the right client, a deal in as little as 8 days. Okay. And then there's companies out there that are very slow. Companies like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Navy Federal, online lenders like Quicken Loans and LendingTree, they move very slow. And so we probably need more time for those. My recommendation is in deciding that date, the first person we need to talk to is whoever the lender is and find out what's the earliest we can close. And then talk to your client and find out, does that date work? Or do we need to extend it a little bit farther? And just keep in mind, again, this is something both the buyer and the seller have to agree on. Okay. Most sellers don't want to take their property off the market and wait for 3 months for you to buy their property, when there's other buyers that are willing to close in 30 days. Right. So we have to temper it. But there's other sellers out there that they haven't found their new home yet that they're going to move to, and they want some extra time. You know, they may be selling the property today and putting it on the market today, but they don't start their new job for 2 months, and they'd really love for the closing to be closer to when they start their new job. Okay. So it's a give and take, and it's negotiable, but we do need to have a date in there. And so typically I'm looking 30 days out. So 3/10/2023, and I would double check my calendar to make sure that that's not a weekend. That is a Friday. Okay. So me personally, I would rather that be 3/9, because as a buyer's agent and as a seller's agent, one of the things to keep in mind is oftentimes there are delays in the closing. And if you schedule your closing for a Friday and there's one little hiccup at the last minute, when do you close? On Monday, right? Because we couldn't close on Friday. Well, that was 3 days of inconvenience for my client.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd rather schedule for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if there's a little hiccup, we close the next day. And yes, there was an inconvenience, but it was only a 1-day inconvenience. Okay. Couple other rules of thumb for me. I don't like Mondays, because those are usually people's busiest days. And frequently when it's not most people's happiest day at work, even for attorneys. And so I want to avoid the Mondays because that's when more mistakes are made. I also avoid the last day of the month and the first day of the month, because everybody in this industry wants to squeeze everybody into this month. And there'll be lots of people fighting for those last minute slots. That's when attorneys are the busiest. And when they are the busiest, that's when they make the most mistakes. And then the first of the month, they're often cleaning up and fixing everything that they did the day before. So I don't like the 1st and the 30th. I don't like Mondays and Fridays. So closing date shall be 3/9/2023, with possession of the property to be transferred to the buyer most of the time, hopefully every time, it's at closing. Okay, when you buy the house, when do you want to get the keys?
Closing table.
Closing table. That is exactly right. That's what we want this answer to be. But there are going to be occasions where the seller needs to stay in the property for so many days after closing. And that's when we're going to use the second option. So they're going to stay in the property for 7 days after closing, ending at 6 p.m. in the evening. Okay. Now, if the seller is going to stay in the property after closing, one of the things we have to do is we have another document that we have to attach right here where it says attach F-219 temporary occupancy. The purchase and sales agreement is going to give you hints. In these situations, we need another piece for the contract. Well, this is one of those cases. If the seller is going to stay after closing, we need this other piece of the contract. And that's the 219 temporary occupancy agreement. And we'll cover that on a future day and tell you how to fill that form out. But what that form does is it creates the rules for those 7 days after closing of this is who's responsible for what. And this is what happens if the seller doesn't move out on time. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind, 60 days is going to be the longest period of time you can put here. Okay. Almost every lender, and I can't think of any exceptions, but I always like to throw a qualifier out there, wants the person buying the property moving into the home within 60 days, or else that buyer's now in default on their loan. Okay. So 60 days is going to be your maximum there. But again, it's whatever the buyer and seller can negotiate. And ideally, we want it to be at closing. Then we're going to put in here, who is the closing law firm and how do we get in touch with them? Well, for our office, you can use whoever you want to, but our strategic partner and the ones that you see come to our meetings and talk to us every week is O'Kelly and Sorahan. I love them. They've got about 24 locations around the Southeast. So pretty much any part of Atlanta, there's going to be an office close to you. Okay. And you can go to their website and you can pull down and figure out where the closest office they have is. My recommendation is put for the closing attorneys that have multiple offices, put which city you plan to close in. Because if I were just to pay O'Kelly and Sorahan, the seller may think that we're closing in Alpharetta, and I think we're closing in Conyers. We want to have agreement on which office we're all going to show up to for the closing. And then we're going to put their phone number in here. Okay. Some other things that are particular about this. You could put an attorney's name in here if you want to, and it means the same thing as their law firm. Okay. So if you only know the attorney by name but aren't familiar with their firm name, put the attorney's name in here, put the phone number. That's acceptable as well. The one other thing that I wanted to add to this, and this goes back to, again, me telling you in paragraph B, it explains things, and looking at the explanation for the closing law firm, there's something in here that's both true and untrue. Okay. And what I mean by that is it says buyer shall have the right to select the closing attorney to close this transaction. Okay. You're going to see a lot of listings out there, and you're going to try and work with a lot of agents that they have their preferred lender or preferred closing attorney, and that's who they want to close with. And they're going to fight you tooth and nail on it. And I want you to understand that yes, the contract says the buyer gets to choose the closing attorney, but the seller doesn't have to agree to it. Okay. In order for us to have a contract, we have to agree. Okay. So Susan has a property for sale, and I'm making an offer to Susan, and I tell her, hey, Susan, here's my offer. We want to close with O'Kelly and Sorahan. And she says, nope, I'm going to counter back. I want to close with
McMichael and Gray.
McMichael and Gray. And I'll be like, well, I get to choose the closing attorney. I want to close with Luter and Larkin. And she says, nope, McMichael and Gray. And I say, well, I want to close with Hookham, Cheatham, and Lye. And she says, no, I want to close with McMichael and Gray. She has to agree. So ultimately, it says the buyer gets to choose, but who really gets to choose? It has to be a mutual agreement there. So don't get caught up on that buyer has to agree. And the cost difference is very little between closing attorneys. The level of service that you'll get is where you'll see things are different. So you'll wind up with your favorite ones. And I certainly do hope that you give O'Kelly and Sorahan a try. But Luter, Larkin, McMichael, and Gray, both are fantastic closing attorneys as well. They do an excellent job, and you're going to meet others as well. Wiseman is another really good closing attorney. Then we have the holder of the earnest money. Okay. So with any offer, the buyer's going to be putting up earnest money with their offer. And the purpose of earnest money, and we'll get into this discussion later, it's partly it shows how serious the buyer is, but the real definition of earnest money is it's liquidated damages if the buyer defaults on the contract. So if the buyer doesn't do what they're supposed to, the earnest money goes to the seller to help make them whole, because they pulled their property off the market, they stopped showing it to other buyers, and then the buyer that we were under contract didn't do what they're supposed to. Well, I need to be compensated for having it off the market. So that's the purpose of earnest money. But that earnest money needs to be held with somebody that can be trusted. Well, there's only 3 people that it can possibly be. The listing broker, the selling broker, or the closing attorney. Those are the only 3 options. So for us, most of the time, we'd prefer and love to be the holder of the earnest money. So we're going to put in our office's name, which you have to spell it all out. You cannot abbreviate this. Anytime you abbreviate the broker's name, if you ever get audited by Greg, it can be $150 fine everywhere where you abbreviate it.
Wow.
So we're going to spell the whole thing out. So it's Keller Williams Realty Atlanta Partners. And I always add our location to it because Keller Williams Atlanta Partners, we've got 11 offices around Metro Atlanta. I want them to know which one is holding that. Now, a couple of things to know about us holding the earnest money. The most earnest money that we will hold as a broker is $10,000. Okay, that's our cap. Typically, what you're going to find in the marketplace, the normal amount of earnest money is 1% of the sales price rounded up to the next 500. So I'm buying a house for $320,000. I'm probably want to be offering either $3,000 or $3,500 in earnest money. If I'm buying a $500,000 property, I need to be putting up $5,000. That's just going to be the expectation. But again, it's whatever the buyer and the seller are willing to agree to. It's always negotiable. And as a buyer, the more I offer in earnest money, the more I'm willing to put at risk, the stronger my offer is. If I put a small amount in there, that really shows that my offer is not serious and I'm not committed to sticking with it to the closing table. The last thing that I want to add about us being the holder of the earnest money is if we're going to hold it, it needs to either be check or ACH, and you can mark both of these. Okay. Most time it's going to be check is how we receive it. And that can be a personal check or that could be a bank check. Okay. Not money orders, not cash. Okay. Those are not ways that we receive money. I don't mind if the other broker holds the earnest money. It's not my preference because a very small percentage of the time, the buyer and the seller may terminate the contract for a reason that is subjective. Okay. And the broker, whoever's holding the earnest money, is going to have to make a decision which one of them deserves to get the earnest money. Does the buyer get it back or does the seller get it? Well, the majority of the time, by far the majority of the time, it's really clear who should get it because somebody didn't do what they were supposed to in the contract. Okay. They didn't show up to closing. They couldn't get the financing. Whatever the case may be, they broke the deal. But sometimes it's going to be subjective also. That the seller was supposed to make a repair. They made the repair, but the buyer thinks that they did a shoddy job making the repair and they're not willing to close because of the shoddy work. Okay. Well, is the work shoddy or not? That's a hard one to determine. And in those cases, the broker is going to have to make a decision. Well, I'd rather it be my broker making that decision than the other broker, right? So you got a question, Sharon?
Yeah, so which side hold the earnest money, make the decision?
Well, it's what we have to agree to. So
Okay.
most of the time, the buyer is going to put their broker in here. Okay. And we can always counter offer and say, no, we want our broker to hold it, or we can let their broker. I don't usually object to the other broker holding the earnest money because I write my contracts really strong so that there's not a lot of doubt. There's very few times where something could be subjective. Either the buyer's in default or they're not. Either the seller's in default or they're not. I try and make it crystal clear. And even when it comes to repairs, I'm detailed enough in the repairs I ask for that it's very easy to determine, was this good work or was this not work? Did this get done or did this not get done? So that we don't have those debates. And understand when the other broker's holding that money, they have an obligation to follow the contract. If they just make an arbitrary, well, I know we were after due diligence when the buyer terminated, but I'm going to give it back to my client, the buyer anyways, just because I think they deserve it. No broker is going to do that because as soon as a complaint gets filed with Greg, they run the risk of losing their broker's license for not following the contract. And they're not going to put their broker's license at risk. Okay. So I don't mind them holding the earnest money. The other option is to have the closing attorney hold the earnest money. And there's going to be a lot of agents out there that prefer to have the closing attorney hold the earnest money because they view them as an impartial third party. And I'm okay with that too, because of how well I write my contracts, except for one case. And that's if it's a cash deal. You don't want the closing attorney holding the earnest money because, and you'll learn this when we look at the F510, which I'm going to talk about in a second today, but we'll review it at a future date. The F510 says that if there's a disagreement over who gets the earnest money at the end of the contract from a deal that fell apart, it has to go to a courtroom to be decided. Okay. The closing attorney doesn't get to make the decision if it's a cash deal. Now, if it's a finance deal, they can make the decision because they're not representing the buyer or the seller, they're representing the bank.
Yeah.
Okay. But in a cash deal, they're usually representing the buyer.
Yeah.
Okay. Which means that if the buyer and the seller have a disagreement, well, one of those two people's their client. They can't be impartial anymore in a cash deal. So it has to go to the court. So I'd rather have one of the two brokers holding the money, because very seldom does anybody win when you go to court, except for the attorneys and the court, right? All the fees and everything gets charged. So if the attorney's going to hold it, though, there's two other forms that we have to have. One of them is an F10 that's part of this contract, and an F511 that gets signed right after the contract. So you got reminders in here that if the holder's the closing attorney, we've got extra work to do. Okay. And then we will, in a future class, we'll go over what the F510 is, what the F511 is, and how those work. Just know that becomes another piece we have to do, and you have the reminder in here. Then we need to designate, do we already, when I'm making the offer, I'm about to send this offer to Susan on her listing, do I have the $5,000 of earnest money in my hand? Okay, I'm making the offer today. Has the buyer already given me the earnest money? That's what this as of offer date means. If you're not holding it and you're signing the contract saying the buyer already gave me the earnest money, you're failing as an agent, right?
Yeah.
Normally what you're going to find is that we're going to get it some days after the contract's written. So I'm making an offer to buy Susan's property. Susan, if you agree to this contract, my buyer will turn $5,000 into the holder within 3 business days.
I want 10,000.
What, Susan?
I want 10,000.
You want 10,000? All right. Well, we're not negotiating right now. I'm just putting together the offer.
Today's cute.
So, but normally 3 days from the binding agreement date is very normal. I would say anything longer than 3 days, you're kind of getting into me wanting to understand, why do you need 5 days to get me the earnest money? Okay. I'm going to start questioning that. So sometimes you'll see 1 day, 2 days, 3 days is kind of the longest. Paragraph 8, we talk about due diligence. Now, a lot of people refer to this as your inspection period, and it gets referred to in the contract in some other places as your inspection period. But understand, during due diligence, yes, Cheyenne?
Yeah. What is ACH?
ACH, that's automated clearinghouse. So for us, that's that we're able to take the payment over an app. That's where it's drawn directly from your bank account.
Oh, okay.
Not paid from a credit card, or it's taken directly out of your account. It's
Okay.
not a check. It's kind of like a digital check, if you will.
Okay.
So you may, when you make your car payment, you may have it set up where it comes right out of your account.
Yeah.
That's an ACH.
Okay.
Okay. Good question. All right. So back to due diligence. Due diligence is your inspection period. Okay. And that's what it's referred to. But don't think of it as just an inspection period. During due diligence, the buyer, not the seller, the buyer can terminate the contract for any reason. Okay. They woke up today, the sky was blue. They thought that was a bad omen. They want to terminate the contract. Well, during due diligence, they have every right to do that. Okay. But the way that we use due diligence is this is our time period to do whatever investigation we need to do to be confident moving forward with the transaction. Okay, so the buyer may hire a home inspector to go inspect the property. They may hire a contractor to go inspect the property. They may hire multiple people to go look at the property. I may want a home inspector to go out. I may want an HVAC contractor to go out. I may need a swimming pool company and a well company to go out. Okay, all of those inspections are perfectly permissible during due diligence, but it's also my time period to do any other research I need. So I have a landscaping business and I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to park my truck in the driveway at the end of the day. Well, I need to get hold of the HOA community covenants and restrictions and find out that there's no clause in there that says you can't have commercial vehicles in the neighborhood. Okay. I want to put a fence in my backyard. I need to make sure that the community is going to allow me to put one in. Okay. Maybe I'm buying a piece of land and I want to make sure that it's zoned in a certain way. I want to make sure that the ground is has a percolation that will allow a septic to be put in. Whatever research I need to do, this is my period to do it. Okay. Once we get past that 7 days, I don't have, I can't just change my mind about buying the property. There's just a very few reasons why I can terminate the contract. And those are going to come in with the exhibits that we attach. Okay. After due diligence, if I don't get approved for my loan, well, there's nothing in the contract that says that I can terminate the contract and get my earnest money back. That's going to be in my loan contingency exhibit. If the appraisal comes low, there's nothing in the contract that says I can get out of the contract and get my earnest money back. That's going to be in my financing exhibit. If I need to sell my house before I can buy this one, that's not in this contract. That's going to be in my sale or lease a buyer's property exhibit. Okay. But during this period, I don't need anything else. I can change my mind for any reason and get out. Does that make sense?
So it is only 7 days.
Well, it's whatever we negotiate. Okay. In today's market, 7 is very average.
Okay.
That's normally what we see. You go back a year ago, we saw a lot of 0 days of due diligence or 2 days of due diligence, but people were offering $50,000 more than appraised value. They were doing no inspection, no financing contingency. It was so competitive that they were giving up their rights as buyers just to be able to get under contract. Okay. And so that period can get longer, but we've been so used to 2 and 3 day due diligences. 7 days now feels very long. Okay.
Okay.
Anything more than 10 days is probably going to be seen very negative for your typical house purchase. Okay. But I'm buying a piece of land and I need to get the county out there and do perk tests and I've got extra things I need to do. Then maybe it might be 30 days. It might be 45 days. So it's normally negotiable, but for your typical house, 7 to 10 days in today's market is what's going to be normal.
Okay, if I decide, if I inspection, I find something I really don't like, I say, I back out, then I lost my earned money.
If you do it during due diligence,
Yeah.
before this period is up, you get your earnest money back.
Oh, okay.
Okay. you wait till day number 11 and you had 10 days of due diligence and you change your mind, you don't get it back.
Okay.
So if you're going to terminate, ideally you want to do it in those first 7 days, 10 days, whatever your due diligence period is. Okay.
Mhm.
We're going to skip option money here. That's something you should not be doing. It's something our broker doesn't like. They don't want you to do. If you need an explanation of what option money is, I'm glad to give that to you one-on-one. The next paragraph is lead-based paint, and this is really clear cut. The house was built before 1978, or some portion of it was, some fixture, or it was not built prior to 1978. If it was built before 1978, it tells you right here, we've got more work to do. We've got another document we need to include with our contract, and that's the lead-based paint exhibit. Okay. And again, we'll cover that on a different day. Then we get to the brokerage relationships. And this is letting all parties know who the buyer's broker is, who the seller's broker is, and what level of representation do they have. Okay. So if we're the buyer, and again, we don't have a lot of room in here, but we do have to put our full broker's name in here. So everything's got to go in there. And then depending on who we're making the offer to, so go back and look in here. If we were making an offer on this one, this would be Keller Williams Atlanta Midtown. Wow, that worked out well. This is a great example for us to work with. I need to put the full name of both. Now, I have a buyer's brokerage
Oh,
agreement.
it is
with
2
my-
o'clock.
What was that?
I have to go because my 2
Ah.
o'clock's here.
Bye.
So we have a buyer's brokerage agreement, so we're representing them as a buyer, as a client. Okay. We're going to make the assumption that the seller is working with them as a client. Okay. But we could have a client relationship, we could have a customer relationship. We do not, as a broker, ever act as a dual agent. Okay. So I want to give you a couple of other scenarios in here that when this happens, where it's Keller Williams Realty Atlanta Partners representing the buyer, Keller Williams Realty Atlanta Partners representing the seller, this is never going to be client-client. Okay. Cheyenne, my client wants to buy your client's property. You following me?
Yeah.
You have the listing. We're going to be acting as designated agents.
Yeah.
Where I have been assigned to represent the buyer. You have been assigned to represent the seller. Okay, so I'm looking out for the best interests of my client. You're looking out for the best interests of your client. That's designated agency.
Yeah.
Okay, so anytime that it's the same broker on both sides, it's never going to be client-client. Let me give you one other example of where it would be something different. I have a listing. I represent the seller as a client. Someone comes to my open house and they don't have an agent and they want to make an offer on the property. I can represent them, but not as a client, only as a customer.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that means is I'm not looking out for that buyer's best interest. I'm just helping them with the paperwork. Okay.
But you get a 6%.
But I get the full commission.
Okay.
Yes, that is exactly right. Paragraph 10C, material relationship disclosure. Are there any relationships between any of the parties? Do the buyer and seller, are they related? Are they business partners? Are you and your client related? You know, close friends, former spouses, you know, anything where there's a deep relationship, where there's a chance that somebody may be colluding, somebody may have an ulterior motive, we need to disclose that. Okay. And we're just going to put it in here. So let's say you're selling your mom's house,
Yeah.
right? You're helping your mom sell her house. You can just put listing agent is related to seller. Boom, and I'm done. That way everybody knows what's going on. Okay.
Okay.
Most of the time there's not going to be anything to disclose, but if there is, put it in there. And here's the thing. Nobody's ever gotten in trouble for exposing too much. The only time they've ever gotten in trouble is not disclosing something they shouldn't have. So if you're in doubt, should I tell somebody this or not tell them? That way you're not going to get in any trouble. Paragraph 11, time limit of the offer. And this is misconstrued, and agents don't understand this oftentimes, is if I were to send you an offer, Cheyenne, and I were to put in here that today's date is 2/10/2023. So if I were to send you this offer today, and it has a time limit of offer of 9 p.m. tonight, when do you have to respond to me?
8:59.
Nope. You don't ever have to respond to me.
Oh,
You don't ever have to. Okay. It's not a compulsion. And that's what I want you to understand is what this time limit is. If you want to accept my offer,
mhm.
you have until 8:59 to accept it. But if you want to counteroffer it, if you're going to decline it, you don't have to do anything before that time. You could wait 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and you could send me a counteroffer and said, hey, Trey, I didn't like your offer the other day, but if you'll change this and this, we can have a deal. Okay. So keep in mind, don't try and use this to put pressure on sellers to make a fast decision. Give them enough time that they can make a comfortable decision. Okay.
So usually how long the seller will respond to the
That's a great question. In most cases, I would say a couple of days is a good time limit to give. So if I were sending an offer to somebody today on Friday, I would probably give them until 7 o'clock on Monday, because weekends are funny, right? And two, I'm going to be paying attention to things, because what if the person I'm making an offer to is a company? If I send that offer, is anybody going to see it before Monday?
no.
No. So it wouldn't matter if I put a date of tomorrow, they're not even going to see it until Monday. My offer will have expired before they ever even knew it existed. So give them enough time. Keep in mind holidays, because during Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving and 4th of July and Memorial Day, people are out playing and having fun and spending time with family. They aren't necessarily looking to make a decision as fast as they would at other times because they're busy with their lives. Give them a little more time in those situations. If today were Monday, I might give you till Wednesday night. That's plenty of time. You've got tonight, tomorrow night, and all day Wednesday. Have me an answer by 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. That's very reasonable.
Okay, but if I love two house, I want to make offer to you until 9 o'clock, 2:10, but when I wait until like expire, nobody answer me. Can I make another offer to the other house?
Make 2 offers at the same time.
how about the both?
And both offers. Okay. What happens if Shen, I send an offer to you and I send an offer to Jackie today
Mhm.
and have them both expire on Monday? Okay. Well, you like my offer and you accept it. Jackie likes my offer and she accepts it. That's awesome. Do you know what I get to do now? Pick my favorite one and terminate the other one. Because remember, during due diligence, what reason do I need to terminate a contract?
Oh, okay.
I can terminate it for any reason I want to, right? That's as a buyer. Now, where you have to be careful is for a seller, when does the seller get to terminate a contract? Only if the buyer is in default. So I can't accept 2 offers when I have 1 house to sell. Even if I only want to buy 1 house, I can make 10 offers at the same time. And I'm just going to pick the one I want to move forward with. I've had a client before, Cheyenne, both you and Jackie accepted the offer. Well, guess what? I like both of your houses. Well, I want to figure out, I've got 10 days now to figure out which one is the better house for me. I might pay to have both of your houses inspected and pick the best one. I may like your house a little bit better today, but after I do an inspection and found out that your foundation is in bad shape and your AC is not working, I may want to go with Jackie's, right? But
Yeah.
if I terminated yours immediately, I wouldn't know that, right? So there's a lot of ways that can play out.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that finishes the first page, guys. Pay attention that there are initial spaces for the buyer and the seller on the bottom of the first page. Those often get overlooked because they're kind of hidden in all that text. We've then got pages of legalese. And I recommend that you guys go back through and read all of this, highlight anything you've got questions about, because you're going to have clients that are going to ask you about it at some point. It would be a very long class for me to go through every paragraph and explain everything in all those paragraphs. So we're going to skip past those and we're going to get here to the exhibits. And these are things that are being attached to the contract and are part of the contract. And with every contract, we're going to have at least one exhibit. And that's going to be our financing exhibits. And that's going to be our FHA or our conventional loan or our USDA loan or our VA loan, or it's an all cash deal. Okay. And just so you know, while this form says all cash exhibit, the all cash exhibit as of this year is now called the no financing contingency exhibit. So it has a different name. So when you go look up the F401, it's no longer called the all cash exhibit. It has a new name now, and a little different language in there, but that's another class for another day. But this is a really good checklist for you to see, hey, am I forgetting anything that needs to be a part of this contract? So I know I'm going to put my financing exhibit in here. So my client's buying it with a conventional loan. Well, I'm going to run through the rest of the list. Is this a backup offer? Meaning the seller already has an accepted contract and I want mine to be a backup? No, I don't need that one. The closing attorney acting as holder of earnest money. Nope, the broker is going to hold the earnest money. I don't need this one. Community association disclosure. Is this property in an HOA? And I need the community association. Yes, it is. I'm going to include that one. Okay. Don't need the condominium. It was built after 1978. I don't need the lead-based paint. It's not for a lease purchase. I use deed book and page and don't need the legal description. There's no loan assumption. I don't need to sell my house first. Seller's property disclosure. Yes, I want to know what the seller knows about the property. So I may mark that one. Okay. I may read in the description that the seller's already told me there is no seller's property disclosure. I may have found when I was looking at the listing, and this one doesn't have it, there's an icon right here. And let's see if I can find one that has it. And I'm betting, oh, there we go. There was one. So you will see on some listings, there will be D for documents. So you can always go check with your documents, and here you'll see they included a seller's disclosure and a community association disclosure. I can go ahead and download those. I don't need to get those from the seller. They've already given them to me. That's now going to be part of my contract. That's my seller's property disclosure and my community association disclosure. Otherwise, I may be asking it. And then I need to assign letters to all these forms. So this would be Exhibit A, this could be Exhibit B, this could be Exhibit C. Okay. That makes those part of this contract. And then I need to complete those forms and mark those with the same letter. Okay. Then we have our section for special stipulations. And this is a section that we'll do another class just on special stipulations. This is the part where we're kind of towing the line. We're having to add language to the contract because there's something that's missing, something that needs to be changed, a special situation that we need. And these can take a lot of different forms. One of them might be, we want a seller's property disclosure, but they haven't provided one yet. So I may need to come in here and put seller to provide buyer with a completed GAR seller's property disclosure within 3 days of binding contract date. Okay. That may be the clause I need to add. We have to be really careful in there with our language because sometimes we put things in there that we think we know what it means, but it hasn't been thought through. That's why it's always good to have somebody else put eyes on it, or there is a list of pre-written special stipulations to cover a wide variety of topics. Okay. And you'll see that I'll do a video just on special stipulations that will get added in there. But this is often, Jackie, you're writing on my screen. There's a wide variety of things that we may tackle in here. This might be where we ask for a home warranty to be included in the deal. Okay. It could be anything from prior in the contract that needs more explanation or clarification. This could be that this purchase and sales agreement is for 2 properties, you know, and then have all the details for both of the properties instead of it being for one. Instead of having 2 contracts, we could have 1 contract covering 2 different properties. Lots of ways special stipulations can be used, but we're the ones that are having to provide the language, which means we're taking a lot of risk when we do that. We know how well written all of this is, right? We have to be super, super careful that we make sure that the language that goes in here is just as strong, just as powerful, and preferably was written by an attorney. That's not always going to be the case. Sometimes it is going to be coming from us, but we do have pre-written special stipulations from the attorneys for a lot of different situations. And lastly, we get to our signature page. And on the signature page for the buyer and the seller, even though it has all of these blanks, all that we need on here is the buyer's signature, their printed name, and the date. The reason we don't need their address, the phone number, or the email is, Cheyenne, I'm sending you an offer. Do I want to give you and your client my client's address, phone number, and email? No. If you need to get information to my client, what should you do?
From me.
You call me. That's exactly right. So for your buyer and your seller, just the name and the date. Down here for the broker, though, you need to fill everything in down here except for the fax number. We don't do faxes, right?
Yeah.
I'm anxiously awaiting for them to take that off of the contract. So if you don't have a fax, you don't police a fax, you're not watching a fax, don't put a fax number in here. But everything else does need to be in there. Okay. In this last little box, this is the binding agreement date box. And you will notice there's no signatures in here. It's just a date and who it was filled in by. For you to understand who fills that box in, we refer to this as binding the contract, which in itself is kind of a misnomer, because when a contract is binding is when everybody has signed it and everybody has a copy. As soon as everybody has signed it and everybody has a copy, somebody, one of the two agents, needs to fill this box in. And all it's saying is that on this date, everybody had a fully signed copy of the contract. It's just an acknowledgement that we're all binding. And then you send that to the other party so that all of us are in agreement when that binding date is. The reason that we do this is that binding date is the start date for all of our timelines. So when you come back to our due diligence period, it's 10 days from binding agreement date. We want everybody in agreement when the binding agreement date is. Same thing's true for our financing contingency, our appraisal contingency, the things that are included in our exhibits. All of our timelines start with that binding agreement date. So doesn't matter which agent fills it in, as long as everybody has a fully signed copy. And that's our purchase and sales agreement.
So what exactly the binding agreement date we should put in there?
Well, I'll give you an example. You and I are doing a transaction.
Yeah.
And I'm making an offer on your listing. And I send over an offer to you today. Okay. And I've signed it and my client has signed it.
Mm-hmm.
If you get it and you show it to your client and y'all like it and everything is good with it and you guys sign it and you send it back to me, when are we binding? Today, right? Everybody has signed it and everybody has a copy. So the binding agreement date would be today, and it was filled in by whichever one of us filled it in. You could have done it before you sent it back to me. After you sent it back to me, I could do it and send it back to you. It's just an acknowledgement that everybody signed it. Give you another situation. I were to make an offer today. You and your clients talk about it tonight. They decide we want to sleep on it and they sign it tomorrow and you send it back to me tomorrow. Tomorrow would be the binding agreement date. And you could fill this in or I could fill this in, but the date that goes in there is tomorrow. Okay. Let me give you one other scenario just to make sure it's perfectly clear. I send an offer to you. You meet with your clients. They like it. They sign it. You sign it. But you don't send it to me until tomorrow morning. Y'all signed it today, but you send it to me tomorrow. Well, when did everybody have a fully signed copy?
Yesterday.
Tomorrow.
Oh yeah, tomorrow.
Right? So even though you signed it today, I didn't get a copy until tomorrow. We're not binding until I have a copy. Okay. As soon as you send it to me, then we're binding tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. And you can do the binding date or I can do the binding date. Either one. All right. And that's it, guys. we ran a little long today, but there's a lot to cover in that document. So keep coming back, and hope to see you guys here every Friday.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Bye, Jackie. Bye, Sharon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Dun, dun.